Joining you from Trackside Villa Park, one of 11 trackside off-track betting locations in Illinois. For more information, visit tracksideotb.com. Horseplayernow.com's Joe Christofek, joined by King James Dixon and Brian W. Spencer, and we're going to talk all about pace and track bias. And James, those two things kind of go hoof and hoof. Pace makes the race, and on certain occasions there's a track bias that we can take advantage of. When you break down a horse race, obviously visualization is very important because the horse that gets the right trip, that's in the right spot, usually finds their way to the winner's circle.
Absolutely. I always like to, as you say, visualize a race when I'm handicapping it. I want to dive into the program and try and imagine how things are going to play out. So I'm obviously looking, is there a lot of speed in the race? Does that set up for a closer? Is there a lack of pace in the race? Is that going to set things up? If there's no speed, who do I think can grab the front? So I really want to be able to try and picture what's going on in the race, figure out what potential outcomes could happen if the pace plays out the way I see it, and go from there.
Now, Brian, when you're visualizing a race, there are races where there's short fields, races where there's bigger fields, there are different surfaces that we're looking at. Are you going through and trying to peg how each horse is going to run? What do you look at when you try to visualize a race and how fast that pace might be from beginning to end?
The very first thing I'm looking for in any race is I want to know who wants the lead, whether it's one horse, 3 horses, 5 horses. I want to know who wants the lead, who I actually think is going to get it, and then whether those other horses who maybe also wanted the lead are going to push that leader along, or whether they're going to be able to sit and settle. The overarching thing that I always want to find first is who's the tactical pace. Who's the horse that doesn't need the lead but is not going to get left behind. That goes for 5-furlong turf sprints. That goes for 1.25-mile turf routes. For me, everybody has their own thing, but I want to find the horse who can settle regardless of the pace, prompt the pace if it's slow, take back if it's fast. Those are the horses that are key at any distance, any surface for me.
For me in a dirt sprint, I'm looking for, if I like a pace horse in the race, I don't want him on the rail. I don't want to be the horse that has to go. I want to be the horse that's sitting, if the horse is rateable. In a turf route, I like horses with tactical speed because maybe they can sit that pocket trip where they can sit inside, they're covered up. You have to find racing room.
Right.
But if you're covered up, you're able to scoot through, and I think that's a very advantaged trip, and it has a lot to do with pace that you're able to hold that position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really need to be focused on not only where they might be, but where they're going to be tucked in, tucked outside. What trip will their pace lead and go towards? So if they're stuck on the rail, and like you said, in a sprint, and they have to go, is that going to be an issue? Or if they're speed in a turf route and they're stuck in the 10-hole and they can't tuck in,
right,
they're going to lose a lot of ground.
That's part of the visualization we're talking about. Yeah,
absolutely.
Now, do you guys look at jockeys at all and say, E.T. Baird's on this horse, good gate rider, chance that this horse is going to break alertly and have a forward position? Julian Laperouse on this horse, we're looking at this jockey to take back. Do jockeys play into your visualization on pace at all?
In some ways, yes. I wouldn't say that it's generally something that's going to, put me on a horse or take me off of a horse, but at the same time, I know that, let's say I have one of those tactical pace type horses that I really love. I'm confident with Robbie Alvarado on that tactical pace horse more than I am on a deep closing, 2-turn turf horse. It's just certain jockeys are better at certain things. You're talking about the pocket trip, which, when it works out right, is probably the best trip in horse racing.
Right.
When it works out badly, you're 8th with nowhere to run.
I'll take my chances.
But when I think of that pocket trip, I always think of Jerry Bailey, number one. He just had, nerves of steel, would sit in that pocket, and I don't think that I've seen a better rider, in my time watching racing than Jerry Bailey in that trip. He was in the pocket, he'd get himself out, and he'd get you the right finish in the stretch.
Well, one of the basic things about pace that a lot of people really have a tough time with when they're learning horse racing is when you're in a sprint race, they go faster. When you're in a route race, they go slower. So if you have a stretch out sprinter, even if they're running 5th early on in their sprint races, chances are they're going to show speed.
Absolutely, and that's where you have to look for a potential. Sometimes you look at the running lines and you said you see 5th, 4th, 3rd, and they were a nice closer. A lot of times when that does not translate well to a route, you can't get them to relax, you can't get them to settle down into 24 and 48 fractions. They're used to going 22, 45, or sitting close to that. So you got to look for that in the condition as well. Sprints to routes, routes to sprints, things like that can definitely make a difference where they're sitting early in the race.
And the thing about that, when you get, that sort of even sprint effort type horse going around 2 turns, sometimes it's not even so much that the horse settled in 5th in the sprint, it's just that's as fast as the horse could run. That's where the horse was left in the sprint. But then when you send that around 2 turns, all of a sudden the horse is on the lead and still unable to settle. It's just so much more obvious that the horse isn't settling on the lead going 2 turns than it is running mid-pack in a sprint.
You made an interesting point about jockeys, and I want to get back to that. Talking about looking for different types of jockeys and looking for pace scenarios. In Southern California, sometimes you get a low-level maiden claimer races where horses haven't naturally shown a lot of speed in the past. I'm looking for an aggressive jock who can get them out of the gate, who has shown experience, like a Patrick Valenzuela, who's now retired, like a Corey Nakatani, who I know can get more speed out of a maiden than they've seen before. Conversely, if I'm looking in a turf race and I'm looking for a come-behind horse and I'm trying to get a jock who can get a horse to relax, I'm looking for a Joel Rosario who's known for getting a horse to sit at the rail and make that one run where maybe in the past they haven't been able to show that. So I look for jocks that I know can somehow maybe change the horse's style to their advantage.
I think it's important, too, that when you look at fractional times in your handicapping or you look at final times in your handicapping, it's a lot of times relative to how the track played that day. And it's not relative to how those times compare to other times, maybe at the same racetrack on a different day. Maybe one day the track is really, really fast and the fractional times are really quick. Maybe another day the track is really slow and the fractional times are slow. I think it's very important for you to compare those fractional times day to day versus track to track.
That's something that I talk about when I'm trying to teach people how to handicap horse races, is that you're basically looking at, the same horse can go out on a really fast track that's playing quickly, run in 109 and change, 3 weeks later really run the exact same race and run 111 and 2.
That's right.
It's not that the horse took a big step back, and we didn't really touch on bias too much, but the one thing that took me forever to learn, and it's probably a good jumping off point, is do not get ahead of yourself.
Yeah, but I think you could
to wire winners to start a card. If they're logical, doesn't mean you have a bias.
But identifying a bias early on the card can help you make money, especially if it's one of those racetracks that you follow a lot and you see those signs. Because if you see the early daily double one in wire-to-wire fashion by 2 10-to-1 shots that had no business winning, then when you're putting together a multi-race wager, you're going to give extra consideration to those kinds of horses.
I made an absolute killing in 2007 when Del Mar debuted their new surface. Every winner seemed to come from mid-pack. It wasn't a day bias, it was a meat bias. And if you didn't pay attention to that, you got killed. And if you did pay attention to that, you can make a lot of money.
There's a lot of people around the country that aren't necessarily paying attention.
But you know what? If you do, and you follow one circuit or 2 circuits, and you can find those types of niches, you can make a good killing.
Yeah.
I don't want to harp on the don't get ahead of yourself point, and you brought it up, which is the key. When you have 2 10-to-1 horses win gate to wire to start the card, who had no business winning gate to wire.
That's what I mean.
But how many times, have you just kind of casually heard, oh, there's a front end bias, and the early pick 3 paid $12 for a buck because it was 3 obvious horses who were supposed to win.
Right.
Just you gotta.
There's not a bias every day.
Right. No.
But you can take advantage of them not only on that certain day, but down the road 3 weeks later, where that deep closer passes tired horses and runs 4th. Then the next time they run, it was a speed track the one day. The next time they run, it's a fair track or a track that's playing towards closers. If you know that, you can take advantage of that information.
Absolutely. Santa Anita, at the beginning part of the meet, was nothing but speed. So I've specifically marked any horse that managed to make up any ground late to play when the track became fair. And the track is playing a little more fair now. I'm looking for those horses to be at better odds because they didn't maybe finish 1st or 2nd. Maybe they got 3rd, and now they've got a track that's playing a little more fairly and hopefully get some better odds than I would otherwise.
Track conditions definitely play a part when you're looking at pace, and they definitely play a part if you're trying to discern a bias. Figure out the pace. Then when you're watching the races, try to determine if there's a bias. Utilize all that information to try to cash tickets.